Chapter 14.3.4 Altruism. When are we most and least likely to help? Carl Wilkins, a Seventh-day Adventist missionary, was living with his family in Kigali, Rwanda, when Hutu militia began to slaughter the Tutsis in 1994. The United States government, church leaders, and friends all implored Wilkins to leave. He refused. After evacuating his family, and even after every other American had left Kigali, he alone stayed and contested the 800,000-person genocide. When the militia came to kill him and his Tutsi servants, Wilkins' Hutu neighbors deterred them. Despite repeated death threats, he spent his days running roadblocks to take food and water to orphanages and to negotiate, plead, and bully his way through the bloodshed, saving lives time and again. It just seemed the right thing to do, he later explained. Christoph, 2004. Elsewhere in Kigali, Paul Rusesabagina, a Hutu married to a Tutsi and the acting manager of a luxury hotel, was sheltering more than 1,200 terrified Tutsis and moderate Hutus. When international peacemakers abandoned the city and hostile militia threatened his guests in the Hotel Rwanda, as it came to be called in a 2004 movie, the courageous Rusesabagina began cashing in past favors, bribing the militia, and telephoning influential persons abroad to bring pressure on local authorities, thereby sparing the lives of the hotel's occupants from the surrounding chaos. Such selfless goodness exemplifies altruism, the unselfish regard for the welfare of others. Altruism became a major concern of social psychologists after an especially vile act of sexual violence. On March 13, 1964, a stalker repeatedly stabbed Kitty Genovese, then raped her as she lay dying outside her Queens, New York apartment at 3:30 a.m. "Oh my God, he stabbed me," Genovese screamed into the early morning stillness. "Please help me." Windows opened and lights went on as neighbors, 38 of them according to an initial New York Times report, though the number was later contested, heard her screams. Her attacker fled and then returned to stab and rape her again. Not until he had fled for good did anyone so much as call the police at 3:50 a.m. Probably no single incident has caused social psychologists to pay as much attention to an aspect of social behavior as Kitty Genovese's murder. R. Lance Shotland, 1984. Bystander intervention. Reflecting on initial reports of the Genovese murder and other such tragedies, most commentators were outraged by the bystanders' apathy and indifference. Rather than blaming the onlookers, social psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané, 1968b, attributed their inaction to an important situational factor, the presence of others. Given certain circumstances, they suspected, most of us might behave similarly. After staging emergencies under various conditions, Darley and Latané assembled their findings into a decision scheme. We will help only if the situation enables us first to notice the incident, then to interpret it as an emergency, and finally to assume responsibility for helping. Figure 14.15. At each step, the presence of other bystanders turns people away from the path that leads to helping. In the laboratory and on the street, people in a group of strangers are more likely than solitary individuals to keep their eyes focused on what they themselves are doing or where they are going. If they notice an unusual situation, they may infer from the blasé reactions of the other passers-by that the situation is not an emergency. The person lying on the sidewalk must be drunk, they think, and move on. But sometimes the emergency is unambiguous and people still fail to help. The witnesses looking out through their windows initially were reported to have noticed the incident, correctly interpreted the emergency, and yet failed to assume responsibility. Why? To find out, Darley and Latané, 1968a, simulated a physical emergency in their laboratory. University students participated in a discussion over an intercom. Each student was in a separate cubicle, and only the person whose microphone was switched on could be heard. One of the students was an accomplice of the experimenters. When his turn came, he made sounds as though he were having an epileptic seizure and called for help. How did the other students react? As figure 14.16 shows, those who believed only they could hear the victim, and therefore thought they bore total responsibility for helping him, usually went to his aid. Those who thought others also could hear were more likely to ignore the victim. When more people shared responsibility for helping, when there was a diffusion of responsibility, any single listener was less likely to help. In hundreds of additional experiments, psychologists have studied the factors that influence bystanders' willingness to relay an emergency phone call, aid a stranded motorist, donate blood, pick up dropped books, contribute money, and give time. For example, Latané, James Dabbs, 1975, and 145 collaborators took 1,497 elevator rides in 3 cities and accidentally dropped coins or pencils in front of 4,813 fellow passengers. The women coin droppers were more likely to receive help than were the men, a gender difference often reported by other researchers, Eagley and Crowley, 1986. But the major finding was the bystander effect. Any particular bystander was less likely to give aid with other bystanders present. When alone with the person in need, 40% helped. In the presence of 5 other bystanders, only 20% helped. From their observations of behavior in tens of thousands of such situations, altruism researchers have discerned some additional patterns. The best odds of our helping someone occur when the person appears to need and deserve help. The person is in some way similar to us. We have just observed someone else being helpful. We are not in a hurry. We are in a small town or rural area. We are feeling guilty. We are focused on others and not preoccupied. We are in a good mood. Oh, make us happy and you make us good. Robert Browning, The Ring and the Book, 1868. This last result, that happy people are helpful people, is one of the most consistent findings in all of psychology. No matter how people are cheered, whether by being made to feel successful and intelligent, by thinking happy thoughts, by finding money, or even by receiving a post-hypnotic suggestion, they become more generous and more eager to help. Carlson et al., 1988. The norms for helping. Why do we help? One widely held view is that self-interest underlies all human interactions, that our constant goal is to maximize rewards and minimize costs. Accountants call it cost-benefit analysis. Philosophers call it utilitarianism. Social psychologists call it social exchange theory. If you are pondering whether to donate blood, you may weigh the cost of doing so, time, discomfort, and anxiety, against the benefits, reduced guilt, social approval, and good feelings. If the rewards you anticipate from helping exceed the costs, you will help. For most people, helping is intrinsically rewarding. Making charitable donations activates brain areas associated with reward. Harbaugh et al., 2007. That helps explain some findings by Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues in 2008. People who give more money away are happier than those who spend their money almost entirely on themselves. Employees who receive a windfall bonus, for example, are later happier if they have done something for other people with it. In one experiment, researchers gave people an envelope with cash and told them either to spend it on themselves or on others. Which group do you suppose was happiest at the day's end? It was indeed those assigned to the spend it on others condition. But why does helpfulness breed happiness, as well as the reverse? And why do we leave tips for people we will never see again and give directions to strangers? In part because we have been socialized to do so, through norms that prescribe how we ought to behave, often to our mutual benefit. Through socialization, we learn the reciprocity norm, the expectation that we should return help, not harm, to those who have helped us. In our relations with others of similar status, the reciprocity norm compels us to give, in favors, gifts, or social invitations, about as much as we receive. We also learn a social responsibility norm, that we should help those who need our help, young children, and others who cannot give as much as they receive, even if the costs outweigh the benefits. In repeated Gallup surveys, people who each week attend religious services often exhibit the social responsibility norm. They report volunteering more than twice as many hours in helping the poor and infirm than do those who rarely or never attend religious services. Hodgkinson and Weitzman, 1992, Independent Sector, 2002. They also give away 3 times as much money. A social responsibility norm was active on January 2, 2007, as construction worker Wesley Autry and his 6- and 4-year-old daughters were awaiting a New York City subway train. Before them, a man collapsed in a seizure, got up, then stumbled to the platform's edge and fell onto the tracks. With train headlights approaching, I had to make a split decision, Autry later recalled. Buckley, 2007. His decision, as his girls looked on in horror, was to leap from the platform, push the man off the tracks and into a foot-deep space between them, and lay atop him. As the train screeched to a halt, 5 cars traveled just above his head, leaving grease on his knit cap. When Autry cried out, "I've got 2 daughters up there, let them know their father is okay," the onlookers erupted into applause.